So, Hyperkind 7, 8, and 9. Basically done the series. Unfortunately, the series cuts off kind of on something of a cliffhanger. There is one more issue called Hyperkind Unleashed, but I had a quick look at it. It doesn't look like it's connected to the rest of the stories. So, unfortunately, we're left at the point now where there is no more story, and it's just dead. It's unfortunate. But I'll be honest, it's kind of a mercy. Because the writing was getting more and more woke as it was going, to the point that the phrase, "trust your truth," actually came up. Yeah. Let's see. So, the 7th issue is in the immediate aftermath of the Hokum and Hex crossover, which was the last video I covered, or the last video I did in this series. Let me just adjust my angle here just a touch. There we go. And I'm very glad to see Hokum and Hex freed from this hokey fucking shit. It's not a good series. It started off with some promise, but it played too hard on the young adult teen angle. It tried to be mature, but some of the maturity is based in one of the characters being a sexually abused runaway. One of the characters being an absolutely vain jackass, self-involved vain jackass. Another being a self-involved vain jackass who happens to be female and black. And I'm not quite sure how to describe Jorj, which is funny because we share the same name. But the thing that strikes me about Jorj is that he's very much a comic book fan. He's very much the fan service character. And he's a power fantasy come to life. Kind of, they tried to make what amounts to a low-rent Wolverine out of him. But maybe if the character had been focused on in a solo project, then some of that characterization could have come through, but in an ensemble cast, it just doesn't come through. And it's the same with Wolverine. In the X-Men books, if you had never read the Wolverine solo series? Seri? No, what's the plural of series? It's probably just series. But if you've never read those, you don't really have a good grasp of the mentality behind his berserker rages. It's much the same with this character, Amok, Jorj. Yeah, the characterization of all of these heroes really just makes you look at them and go, God, you're a hateful bunch. If I met any of you on the street, I'd refuse to befriend you. With the possible exception of Jorj. Jorj, well, he's got a bit of a simp complex for Lisa Armada, who was in a love triangle with the other 3 characters. Yeah. It's basically a teen angst soap opera, if they're not in costume. And a lot of the time in costume, which kind of really takes away from the story. We could call it early CW, for that matter. Or proto-CW. But as far as the storyline goes, At the end of the Hokum and Hex crossover, Lisa is down, apparently dead, from overexerting her power. And it's revealed that the power is actually based on their life forces. And because Armada's power is energy blasts, various projectile weapons, then, of course, the more power she expends, the more that she's placing herself in jeopardy. And she ends up basically falling in battle. The other three figure out that there's a nursery rhyme that was used to... And this is actually fairly clever storytelling. The other three figure out that a nursery rhyme that the runaway knew, and that was somewhat common, is actually the encoding of a way to find the truth about the Paxes. And they do end up finding a Temple of the Faithful, which I guess is some sort of Paxis cult. They find a woman who claims to have been Paxis, though in the stories leading up to it, it's shown how the other Paxis were killed or destroyed by Paragon John. And yeah, it's... how to put it? It's very... well, even Paragon John's method for removing the memory of the Paxis is actually fairly well thought through. It relies on science that has since been debunked, subliminal messaging, which may have even been debunked when this was, actually written. But it was a combination of subliminal messaging and a soporific hallucinogen that basically made people more suggestible. And essentially because he had so much money, because his father had been a media mogul, he's kind of a Donald Trump or Ted Turner sort of character. More Ted Turner than Donald Trump. Or possibly whoever the big newspaper magnates were at the time. Trying to remember who would have been big. The Hemsleys? Anyway, yeah, through a combination of manipulated mass media and drugs fed to the populace, he managed to manipulate history to his liking. It's a little prescient. Just a touch. But as is gloriously true in art as it is in life, there's always a resistance force. And this appears to have been the group that became this Paxis cult, the Faithful of the Shining Path. So eventually they follow all the clues, get to where they need to be, discover this woman, Amber Transphasia. Okay. It's an interesting choice for a name, but she claims to be former Paxis, and this will be important in a little bit. Anyway, they discover that they have to put Armada back into the machine that gave her her powers. She gets revived. Everything's fine again for 5 minutes. I think that's the end of issue 8. Then... sorry, no, that's kind of the storyline of these 3 issues. Then towards the end of issue 9, an old villain who's kind of covered the tracks of the new kids a little bit from the shadows, foreshadowing, things like that, makes his presence known to the former Paxis, Amber Transphasia, who I assume would probably have been Dream Dance. At about the same time that Tempest, earlier in the books, Z-Man, who had killed Tempest, it was revealed in the first episode of this series, 7, that Paragon John had actually manipulated him into destroying Tempest. But somehow Tempest's soul is still around. There's a bunch of different little mechanics and plot elements that don't get explained here that one hopes would be explained later and just aren't. But her form is recorporated. And she's under the impression it's still 1963. She's got some memory issues. But one of her memories comes through, and she was supposed to have been a gymnast in the Olympics in, I think it was 1912, and had come second place. But then they show her training with the alien who gave the original Paxis their powers in a flashback. And she's dressed in 90s leotard type gear. A very low-cut shirt, very tight leggings. That's some terrible anachronism. But, yeah. There's also a scene where she is picked up by two gay men driving a Jeep, because why not lean right into the stereotype? And they have a giant pink triangle in the middle of their windshield, which of course she remarks on because she was involved with freeing concentration camp prisoners. She points out that she saw the pink triangle and the yellow star. The story goes out of its way to make a point about gay rights. Yeah. Because it was the original pride fight back then. Yeah. Not surprising. I do believe Barker is actually a gay man. 1 second. So a quick little bit of history research. Clive Barker has been openly gay since early in the 90s. Probably before this story came out. So we're left with a writer who basically had to inject his politics. So again, proto-wokeness. It is what it is. So yeah, the story cuts off with this old enemy who at the time was, in the early days, reminds Phasia that he used to be known as, oh god, some of these names, Lazarex the Robot Master, but has returned as Lazarex Prime. I'm guessing this is kind of an Ultron analog. Yeah, and that's last panel, end of the story. The next story is Hyperkind Unleashed #1, which I guess was some sort of special, but it doesn't pick up where the story left off. So, yeah, that's what we've got. Recommendation, stay away from this series. The only issue you really need is the issue with Trip Monroe from Hokum and Hex, which I believe was issue 6. Everything else is irrelevant trash. Which is kind of a come down from my nostalgia earlier on. I don't believe I had ever read issue 7, 8, or 9. I believe I'd kind of fallen off the interest wagon on those books, or perhaps they had stopped being shown or sold in the store I was buying them from. If I recall correctly, it was a drugstore at the time. So, yeah. So, that's that. Hyperkind is done, thankfully. I will finish Hokum and Hex. Actually, I'm not done with Hyperkind. I just realized I have to do that Unleashed one. If I recall correctly, there are 2 Unleashed books. So that will be my next review, will be the Hyperkind Unleashed. And then I'll go back to the Hokum and Hex ones. And finish that series. After that, then it's Saint Sinner and Ecto Kid. Ecto Kid probably had the most creative power set. And I'll talk about that when I do the Ecto Kid reviews. I'm not sure which one I'm going to review first. It'll probably be whichever one has the lowest number of issues. And I believe that's Saint Sinner. Unless the only thing that'll change that is if the Hyperkind Unleashed is the only other book that follows from a series. That'll be the next one I do, simply to get the Hyperkind stuff out of the way. Other than that, I hope you're having a good day. I hope you continue to have good days. Ooh, sorry about that. And as always, rise and rise again until lambs become lions. Bye-bye.